Need you to try to find in your Bibles Ecclesiastes, all right? You may have to go to the table of contents, but try to find the book of Ecclesiastes chapter 12. And with a little help from Swindoll's Living on the Ragged Edge, a great chapter on this, I want to share with you a message titled, It's Time to Get Busy. It's time to get busy. How many of you are commonly late when you go places? How many of you commonly late? Raise your hands. Okay, several. How many of you tend to procrastinate if you've got an assignment or a test you've put off studying for, or a assignment at work, or a project at home, or an email to send, or a letter to write, something you've put off longer than you should have? Would you raise your hand? All right, many. It's time to get busy. Now, we just wrapped up. If you are new with us this morning, haven't been with us, we just wrapped up, I think it was 14 Sundays that we spent in the book of Daniel. And we took some time to look at the phenomenal testimony, the example of this great Old Testament prophet. One of the things that was noteworthy about Daniel is that in Daniel chapter 1, he begins to stand for and honor God when he's only 15 years old. Now, I don't believe he began then. Even earlier than that, he had been laying the foundation, the groundwork for being someone who was going to live for God no matter what. And then we get to the last chapter that we wrapped up with last Sunday. We get to Daniel chapter 12, and we find Daniel as an 85-year-old man, still standing for and honoring Christ. Now, folks, today it seems like we have too many believers that are just a flash in the pan. Too many believers today are fair weather followers, like some that maybe decided not to come this morning because it just might rain before you get home. Have too many believers today that are of the mindset that when the tough gets going, they're done. That's their mindset about the Christian faith. Now, if you believe that God is worthy of 70 plus years of faithful service to Him, that God is worthy of that, would you say amen? Amen. Sure He is. And that's what Daniel does, and that's the example that he sets for us. Now, we, of course, have a few that have done that already. Miss Lula's been serving the Lord for 150 plus years now. She's 174 and started sometime when she was young. Brother Bill is right there on her heels, and we got some folks that are right there with it. Now, this morning I want us to think about ourselves. It's also a passage that applies to our kids and to our grandkids. It's this idea of doing like Daniel. It's starting early and it's going long, or at least giving what you got left in honoring and serving Christ. Now think about this. The late George Gallup, in the final volume that he wrote, it was titled America Wants to Know, and he compiled over 600 pages of information about our nation. And as we might expect, the final pages were on the topic of what he called longevity, or what we might refer to as the graying of America. And in that section, we find that Gallup wrote this. Now note, this was written in 1980, okay? So a few years have passed. But here's what he wrote. For many people, the age of old is arriving later than ever before. Take the case of the last 3 generations of a hypothetical American family. When the grandfather was born in 1900, he could have expected to outlive, barely, his midlife crisis. The average lifespan at the turn of the century was only 47 years. For the father, born in 1940, the odds were against surviving to enjoy retirement. The average lifespan that year ended at about age 63. Yet his son, born in 1980, can look forward to almost a decade of life after 65, for the average lifespan today stretches to more than 73 years. Now, today, as you probably know, it's right around 80 years is the expected lifespan. My dad used to say that with all the advancements in medicine, that eventually people are going to be sitting around dying from nothing, is what he had to say, okay? Well, I guess one of the first questions that comes to our mind when we think about this is, are we of the young or are we of the old? And someone has posed that question, how do you know when you're getting old? And I came across some answers to that I thought were kind of humorous, and I'll share these with you. You know you're getting old when everything hurts and what doesn't hurt doesn't work. Okay? You know you're getting old when you and your teeth don't sleep together. Right? You know you're getting old when you are proud of your lawnmower. Okay? Now I have to admit, I've got a Hustler 60-inch zero turn and I like my mower. Yeah. So I'm already there. You know you're getting old when you try to straighten out the wrinkles in your socks and discover you aren't wearing any. You know you're getting old when your knees buckle and your belt won't. You know you're getting old when happy hour is when you take a nap. You know you're getting old when it takes twice as long to look half as good. You know you're getting old when you have a party and the neighbors don't even realize it. These last two, I guess, are my favorite. You know you're getting old when you turn out the lights for economic rather than romantic reasons. And finally, I might get in trouble for this one, but it's pretty funny. You know you're getting old when getting lucky means you found your car in the parking lot. So more people are getting old, obviously, because people are living longer. 100 years ago, only 4% of the American population was 65 years or older. Today, that number has quadrupled. Today, 16% of the American population is 65 or older. In just another generation, in the next 40 years, 25%, a fourth of the population will be 65 or older. Did you know that today there are about 75,000 people in the United States that are 100 years or older? 75,000 people. And so with this increase in the number of people who are living longer, we are reminded that getting older is sometimes extremely challenging. As people get older, there are often feelings of resentment. Sometimes there are feelings of bitterness about how they've been treated by others, how life maybe even has treated them. There are often the feelings of fear, the fear of failing health, the fear of financial struggles, the fear of being left alone, the fear of losing one's mind, the fear of how to work a stupid smartphone, or the other advancements in technology. And finally, there's the fear of dying. And then there are the feelings that I hope to help each and every one of us with this morning as we consider this passage in Ecclesiastes. It's the feelings of guilt and the feelings of regret regarding one's walk with God. I don't know how many times through the years, starting as a young pastor, I've had elderly people come and begin to realize that they've lived their whole life for all the wrong reasons. And so many have just been overwhelmed with this idea of regret in how they have spent their lives. And so often people begin to look back and they say, I've blown it. I've fouled it all up, and if I could do it all over again, I would have a better relationship with my family. If I had it all to do over again, I would have a different attitude toward work. If I had it all to do over again, I would relate with people differently. If I had it all to do over again, I would be less self-centered and less self-reliant. And I would have pursued the things that are of an eternal nature. I'm just now coming to realize that the only things that are really important in life, the only things that are going to last are the things of God. So let me share a few verses with you this morning that are for each and every one of us. These verses at first glance are going to sound like they're just for the young. They're not. They're for every one of us. They're for anyone who still has the mental capability to focus on God and be used of Him. Because, see, the thing about aging is that we're all getting older. The thing about getting old is that we all anticipate that if the Lord doesn't come, we're anticipating getting really old one day. And so this passage is for young and old alike, no matter where you are in life. So look with me at Ecclesiastes chapter 12. And I'm going to read for a little bit, and then we're going to go back and look at it more closely. Now, as I read through it, see if you can kind of begin to get your head around what Solomon is talking about here. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, beginning in verse 1. Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, before the difficult days come, and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few, and those that look through the windows grow dim, when the doors are shut in the streets and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird and all the daughters of music are brought low. Also they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. You see, folks, this passage is a graphic description of the progressive deterioration of the human body. It describes aging through the use of a number of metaphors. And the main point is repeated in the passage. The main point of the passage is that each and every one of us, before we are physically and mentally incapable of doing so, we are to, look at verse 1, remember now your Creator in the days of your youth, and before the difficult days come and the years draw near when you say, I have no pleasure in them. Now, you may be here this morning, you may be hearing this, and you may say, well, Bill, you got to kind of realize this old gray mare ain't quite what she used to be. I feel like I'm kind of already been put out to pasture. Well, listen, this passage says that before you fall apart, before your spirit goes to be with the Lord, you are to remember your Creator. And so the way that this passage describes the days of trouble, when you think about it this way, everybody in the building is young. Everybody's young. Everybody is able to be here. Everybody is able to sit and listen and hear me. Everybody's able to go about life to some degree or another. You're not on your deathbed, okay? So don't check out on me this morning. Listen to this, ever how much youth you got left in you, and apply this and move forward with it. The very first word is the word remember. Now, in the Bible, the word remember means to act decisively on behalf of someone. Numerous times in the Bible, you'll have God remembering Hannah, God remembering so-and-so, remembering so-and-so. That doesn't mean that God forgot about them, the way we think about it. It just means God is choosing to act decisively on someone's behalf. And so when we remember God, it is acting decisively on behalf of God while we still have the youth to do so. Chuck Swindoll says that to remember God is to release whatever pretense of self-sufficiency we may have and say, living God, I commit myself to you. You created me, so you know what is best for me. I willingly adapt my plan to your plan. Willing to adapt my life to your plan. I am ready to go your way. That is acting decisively on His behalf. Solomon says that we need to do this. Look at verse 2. While the sun and the light, the moon and the stars are not darkened, and the clouds do not return after the rain. Solomon is beginning to use metaphors to describe the one who is too old to act decisively on behalf of God. Most scholars believe, when you look at verse 2, that it is a reference to the mental dullness that usually begins to develop when a person gets into their later years. we might jokingly say something like, well, the lights are on, but nobody's home. Or we might say something like, they're not quite as sharp as they used to be, or their mind is not as bright as it once was. And so Solomon is saying, before the lights get dim, then act. While your mind is still working, while you can still process things clearly, act for God. Look at the last phrase here in this verse. And after a rain, the idea is that the storm clouds have gathered, like they're gathering around us right now, and then the rain comes, and then eventually the rain stops and the clouds dissipate, and it's at that point oftentimes that it's just blazing hot, right? Right after a storm has passed, the sky is clear and the sun's bearing down on you. He's saying that's the season you're in. And in that season, that's why you act for God. That's why you get busy. That's why you do things. You don't wait for the clouds to gather again. You don't wait for your thinking to get cloudy or foggy again. You do it while you have the mental capacity to do so. Now, like I'm sure probably all of you, I have known people with Alzheimer's. I, in my home, experienced with my grandmother who went senile, we used to say. Dementia is no respecter of persons. We dealt with that with my father-in-law. And so we all get the idea of where the mind is not functioning like it used to. My dad had a favorite joke he used to tell about that. He talked about two couples. And they were on a walk one day, and the women were in front, and the men were trolling behind them. And one of the men was telling his friend about a new restaurant they had found that they really liked. And he said it was just fabulous. Prices were good. The food was excellent. He said, you guys need to go there. He said, well, what's the name of the restaurant? And he goes, he said, what's the name of that place? And he tried to remember the name of the restaurant. And finally he said, what's the name of that really pretty flower? He said, a tulip? He said, no, the one with the thorns down the stem. He said, a rose. He goes, yeah. And he hollered up at his wife and he said, hey, Rose, what's the name of that restaurant we really like? Solomon is saying, act decisively on behalf of God while you still have your wits about you. Solomon continues to describe the aging process. He says to remember God before you get too old, described as being, look at verse 3, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble and the strong men bow down, when the grinders cease because they are few and those that look through the windows grow dim. Let's back up and look at these four phrases. The keepers of the house that tremble is likely a reference to when the head begins to shake a little bit. And the hands begin to shake a little bit. Maybe it's the voice that's not as strong as it used to be. And we have some dear saints here in our church family, and you know that the head's bobbing a little and the hand is trembling. And it's a sign that you're getting older. We see the next phrase, the strong men that stoop down, is believed to be a reference to the strong legs that carry the body that eventually weaken and begin to sag at the knees. Someone once said, you know you're getting old when you bend over to tie your shoes and look around to see if there's something else you can do while you're down there, right? Those knees, those legs are not what they used to be. The grinders that cease because they are few is obviously a reference to the loss of teeth. I remember, again, my grandmother, she loved country ham. She just loved, I guess, the salty flavor to it. And I don't know if there's a tougher type of meat than country ham. And she didn't have any teeth. She'd gum it. And she couldn't bite it, so she'd just kind of tear off a piece, and she'd gum that stuff till it was gone. It would just always amazed us that she could eat a big old slab of country ham the time the rest of us could with a knife and a fork. When the grinders become few. Those that look through the windows that grow dim is again a reference to the loss of eyesight as one grows old. Solomon continues with these metaphors of what it is like to grow old. Look at verse 4. When the doors are shut in the streets and the sound of grinding is low, when one rises up at the sound of a bird and all the daughters of music are brought low. And most of this seems to be referring to the loss of hearing, when sounds fade and songs grow faint. Keep thinking of these jokes from my dad. Talked about there were three gentlemen together, and it was kind of windy like it was yesterday, and the first one said, "It's windy today." And the second one said, "No, it's not, it's Thursday." And the third one said, "I'm thirsty too, let's go get a Coke." Right? We just don't hear like we used to. Notice that the sound of the bird, it may be harder to hear, and yet the elderly often rise at the crack of dawn. It's just a bird that they can barely hear. It's just the faintest of sounds that will rouse you, and you're up early when you'd rather not be. Someone said, just when you are successful enough to sleep late, you are so old you always wake up early. We go on to verse 5. Also, they are afraid of height and of terrors in the way. When the almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper is a burden, and desire fails. For man goes to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the streets. I think Solomon is becoming very practical here at the end. He mentions the fear of heights. Now, you don't have to get old to have a fear of heights. I don't like heights. I never have. But when you get older, you know that one step can be disastrous. You know that one fall can be tragedy. And so it magnifies. And the terrors in the way, or possibly in the road or in the street, it's just the idea of stepping out and doing life. You don't know what's there. And the fear of just getting up and getting out and going about your daily life sometimes can be full of terror for someone who is very elderly. When the almond tree blossoms, now we don't have almond trees here, but we can think of the springtime in the white dogwoods, or maybe the best analogy for us would be in the springtime when the big Bradford pear trees are in bloom. And the idea would be like with the almond tree, that it's full and it's white. It's like a full white head of hair, I think is what he's talking about. Again, the graying of America. This next one to me is really interesting. It's the reference to when the grasshopper is a burden. The grasshopper is a burden. And I think what this is talking about, as I pondered on this and studied on it, you see, when you're doing life and you're raising kids and you're running to work and everything's happening in your life, frankly, you don't have time to bother with a grasshopper. It's just a grasshopper. And what happens to many in their later years is that the smallest of things, the things that in their younger days they wouldn't have paid any attention to, they become fixated on those things. Some of you have parented your parents and you've seen that. Sometimes the smallest of things that you never would think about when you're younger, you now get fixated on them. They become all-consuming things that you just can't get away from. When the grasshopper is a burden, it's a weight. It's wearing you out because you are so focused on it. And then finally, he says, when desire fails. And this seems to be a reference to the lack of romantic vitality that comes in the end of our days. I personally find this hilarious. If you stop and think about it, this is Solomon. This is a man. This is a man with 700 wives and 300 concubines. And he says that the last thing to go is desire. The head's white. I can't see. I can't hear. Everything is trembling. My knees are weak. But the last thing to go, he says, is when desire fails. Again, this is a description of a person whose life is almost over. Their body is falling apart and then death happens. Solomon is saying, remember your Creator, act decisively, commit yourself to your Creator before those days of trouble come. Solomon then restates the phrase that he began with. Look with me in verse 6, if you would. Remember your Creator. Act decisively on behalf of your Creator before the silver cord is loosed, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the well. Then the dust shall return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it. I believe all of these phrases here in verse 6 are just different ways of saying act decisively on behalf of God but before your life ends. The idea of being loosed, broken, shattered, all of those communicate the idea that it's over. Do it before life is over. We might say commit yourself to God before the fat lady sings, right? Don't wait till the end. Dedicate yourself to God while you have an opportunity. Swindoll writes, if the journal stopped here, it would leave us with a very glim picture. If all we could look forward to in life were gray hairs and fewer teeth, then I'd call that a bleak future. But there's more, much more. There's something to smile about. What is it? Again, it is remembering the Creator. That puts a smile on the face of the aging. When his perspective is inserted, it is like a ray of light hitting a prism, and suddenly beautiful colors shine through. And so let's not misunderstand what Solomon is getting at here. What he is not advocating is to wait and do what so many people want to do, is to wait till the end of their days. That's when they'll connect with their Creator. That's when they'll get things right. And what Solomon is saying is don't wait and face death as a senile, trembling, weak-kneed, toothless, blind, deaf, gray-haired, slow-moving dust ball who is about to return to the dust of the earth. Solomon is saying now is the time. Now is the time. No matter how old you are, no matter what youth is left in you, don't delay. Don't put it off. Don't wait till it's too late. Don't live with regret. Don't enter your final days realizing that you've lived for all the wrong things. Render service to God now. Serve other people. Don't live for yourself. Make that change in your priorities now. Now is the time to do it. I'm sure you realize that we have some phenomenal examples here in our church family of people that are doing that. Joked earlier. But folks, we should be extremely grateful for some of the people I mentioned earlier and others like them that are living for Christ, serving Christ. I was at the Friendsville Fun Day yesterday, and there's Brother Lloyd. Brother Lloyd, how old are you now? 91. Brother Lloyd was there selling bird houses and bird feeders. I walked in the house yesterday after I left and got home, and I had a bird feeder under my arm. And I looked at Becky and I said, Brother Lloyd wore me down. Okay? I saw Sue and I said, she was there at the table, and I said, Brother Lloyd's going to hit you up to buy a bird feeder. She said, I know, I already have 4. And sure enough, he came over and tried to sell her one, and she said, I haven't got up the last one I bought from you, so that cut her a little slack. Brother Lloyd's building bird feeders, building bird houses, out early on a Saturday morning, setting up his table in the prime spot to sell those things and give all that money to what? To missions. To help support Mark and Hannah. 91 years of age. Still going. Doing more than what some of you are doing right now. They are an example to us of steadfastness. They're an example to us of determination. They are examples to us of faithfulness to God. We should honor them. We should be thankful for them. Amen? Amen. Finally, let me end with this. The reality of it is that some are going to struggle in doing this, depending on where you are in life and your age, because what you're going to do is you're going to get fixated just on the idea of dying. You know it's coming. And that is something that Satan takes and consumes all your thoughts. He captivates you with it, and it's all you can do is just the dread and the fear of passing from this life to the next. And that's where all your time and all your attention and all your focus goes. And so for you, I just want to close with a story. It's a story about a little boy by the name of John Todd, who became a pastor in the 1800s. He was born in 1800 in the state of Vermont. And when he was only 6 years old, both of his parents died. And I'll read to you the rest of the story. The children in the home had to be parceled out among the relatives. And a kind-hearted aunt who lived in North Killingsworth agreed to take John and give him a home. With her, he lived until some 15 years later when he went away to study for the ministry. When he was in middle life, his aunt fell desperately ill and realized that death could not be far off. In great distress, she wrote her nephew a pitiful letter. What would death be like? Would it mean the end of everything, or would there be beyond death a chance to continue living, growing, loving? Here's the letter John Todd sent in reply. It is now 35 years since I, a little boy of 6, was left quite alone in the world. You sent me word you would give me a home and be a kind mother to me. I have never forgotten the day when I made the long journey of 10 miles to your house in North Killingsworth. I can still recall my disappointment when, instead of coming for me yourself, you sent your colored man, Caesar, to fetch me. I well remember my tears and my anxiety as perched high on your horse and clinging tight to Caesar, I rode off to my new home. Night fell before we finished the journey, and as it grew dark, I became lonely and afraid. Do you think she'll go to bed before I get there? I asked Caesar anxiously. Oh no, he said reassuringly. She'll sure stay up for you. When we get out of these here woods, you'll see her candle shining in the window. Presently, we did ride out in the clearing, and there, sure enough, was your candle. I remember you were waiting at the door, that you put your arms close about me, and that you lifted me, a tired and bewildered little boy, down from the horse. You had a big fire burning on the hearth, a hot supper waiting for me on the stove. After supper, you took me to my new room. You heard me say my prayers, and then you sat beside me until I fell asleep. You probably realize why I'm recalling all this to your memory. Someday soon, God will send for you to take you to a new home. Don't fear the summons, the strange journey, or the dark messenger of death. God can be trusted to do as much for you as you were kind enough to do for me so many years ago. At the end of the road, you will find love and a welcome waiting, and you will be safe in God's care. I shall watch you and pray for you until you are out of sight, and then wait for the day when I shall make the journey myself and find you waiting at the end of the road to greet me. So, don't fear your homegoing. Act decisively on behalf of God while you have the opportunity. And all God's people said, amen. Would you bow your heads with me this morning? Alan, would you come? And Alan's going to bring us a hymn of invitation. And I just want to challenge you this morning to think about where you are in this way of acting decisively, of committing yourself, giving yourself to the service of your Savior, to loving the people around you, of sacrificing for them. Acting decisively on behalf of your Creator. Would you stand with me this morning? Father, I want to commit this time to you that individually we would just ponder that question. We have some 15-year-olds and we have some 85-year-olds. As we think of the life of Daniel, who was steadfast, taking a stand and honoring you for a lifetime, Father, may some decisions be made this morning to follow you, serve you, live for you for a lifetime. No matter where we are today, no matter what our age is today, may we commit the rest of what we have to you, for you are worthy. We commit these things to you this morning. We invite you just to keep your heads bowed and your eyes closed and to ponder where you are.